taking on after a robot has been speaking to us is quite a tall order. If you look in the, my name is André du Plessis. I'm a South African, but I live in Switzerland. For ILGA, the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, because we keep adding letters to the alphabet soup. It creates our organizations incredibly long. The title that I was originally going to be talking on was the really long one, establishing and progressing in LGBTQ equality programs and the application, blah, blah, blah. It felt too long for me, so I made the short one is LGBT and STEM. And it's very clear to me that I'm going to speak pretty much with just the first 4 letters on STEM and not really on the medicine side of it stuff. And that's because this is where I live, in Geneva, which is famous for 2 things, I think. At least in my head. It's famous for being the seat of the human rights work of the United Nations, where incredible work is being done on the equality for LGBTI and all people around the world. And then just up the road on the French-Swiss border, we have a huge Hadron Collider, and CERN is in Geneva as well. And actually in Geneva, we end up, in the queer world in Geneva, we end up coinciding a lot between the queer scientists up at CERN and the LGBTI human rights activists downtown. Oop, there we go. So a little bit about my organization. Who are we? We are a world federation of 1,300 LGBTI organizations. We're in 140 countries or so around the world. So we're not just talking about amazing groups like COC Netherlands right here in Amsterdam, or Stonewall in the UK, or the Human Rights Campaign in the USA. We're talking about LGBTI organizations in Samoa, in the Pacific, in Uganda, in Morocco, in Ecuador. And we are a truly global LGBTIQ civil society with huge challenges for the whole range of intersex, trans, bisexual, lesbian, and gay people. My organization, we have a headquarters in Geneva, and we help with international advocacy. Yes, we speak at the UN. We try to give voice as much as we can, particularly when people come from the most marginalized communities. We do research, and you'll see a little bit of that in a minute. And we represent. We don't get 1,300 organizations to agree, which are representing the hundreds of millions of queer people around the world, but we do our best to highlight what are the most important issues at any one particular moment. We support our member organizations, and we raise awareness, and that's why I'm here today to talk with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of the world for LGB, the first part of LGBTQI+++, whatever. LGB, this is talking about people's sexual orientation. I hope I don't need to do a 101 on what this is. I'm going to assume. I think we're amongst generally a very friendly space here, but you'd be surprised how often we actually have to talk through the very basics with people. I'm not sure where this points. There we go. This is the state of the world's laws, and I emphasize the word laws because the reality of a law in a situation on the ground is very different. This is our map, which is from last year. We don't have the map for this year. And as you can see, some countries are deep dark green, some countries are a little bit yellow, and some are deep dark red. What we have here is places where you have marriage equality, and there is relationship protection for same-sex couples. So emphasis, I'm talking about LGB here only. Right through to places where there's kind of no real laws on the books and things are a little bit ambiguous. Right through to places where it is a crime for people of the same sex to have sex. And that happens in many complicated and different ways, right through to people being executed, people being put in prison, sometimes to just the law being used to make sure that you kind of stay in your place and don't rock the boat too much. We have people being arrested and placed in prison just in the last few weeks. So I just want to paint that as a very serious situation when we're talking about inclusion, diversity. Protection in the workplace, we also do some research on this. This is the state of the world's laws on where you are protected on grounds of your sexual orientation, the places where your boss cannot just come in and say, you are fired because you're a bisexual. But these are the places where that cannot happen, in theory. You can see that there's a lot of the world which still has no protection at all. And And in places like the United States, of course, it really varies depending on state, so we can't get into the details here. I did want to highlight as well, if you look down at southern Africa, you'll see that if you compare with the previous map, Botswana, for example, is a country which has criminalizing laws, but also has protection for sexual orientation in its legislation, which goes to show some of the complications that we live in these days, where a government is still not willing to decriminalize, but is somehow willing to protect its workers. And I put this slide up because it's important to remember that scientists, engineers are workers, they're employed. So in your institutions, are your employees, your consultants, your contractors, your academics, are they protected? We also do a survey of around 60, 70 countries around the world, where we do an online anonymous survey. We get results from Saudi Arabia. We get them from all over the world. This is the report will be released in a few weeks. This is a preview. We have a question on there. Should there be equal rights for lesbian, gay, and bisexual workers? Less than half the world thinks that we should have equal rights in the workplace. If you don't know anyone who is LGB. Sorry, just over half. You can see the numbers change hugely once you know someone. And that's something we find huge in LGBTIQ advocacy and change, is the idea of coming out, of people actually understanding, oh, you're not actually this horrific, scary person who I don't understand. You're actually just like the rest of us. So I've talked about LGB. I'm going to talk a little bit about T. This is the gender identity, the gender expression. I'd like to, again, think that we're amongst friends and everyone knows what we're talking about. But again, we're talking here about people whose preferred pronouns, their gender, may be different from that was given to them assigned at birth. Somebody who's given the sex of male at birth, but actually identifies as a woman. So that's what I'm talking about. Legal gender recognition, that means the ability to be able to change your documents, like your passport, your birth certificate, your ID card, to be able to say, okay, it used to say male, but actually I look like a female, I am a female, I want it to be female. This can only happen in those countries that are green. There's a few changes since this map came out, and my thanks to TGU, based in Berlin, for this map. And you can see in some places it's prohibited. This map, I just want you to understand, it's incredibly difficult to change your gender marker on your identity document. That can be your official government-issued one, but also remember that you are issuing ID documents all the time to people in your institutions. So are you making sure that maybe if you can't get the official document, that at least the document that you're providing in your institution reflects the gender identity, preferred gender marker of the person? Again, so different now. Should there be equal rights for trans workers? Yes, actually, and it's interesting that slightly more people say, yeah, we do think there should be equal rights for trans workers than they did for LGB. And I don't know why that is, but it's something for us to mull on. And this is, again, just to show some of the complexities of actual legal gender recognition. It's not just a matter of a government saying you can now change. The requirements that you have to go through to be able to change the gender marker on your ID document sometimes are horrific. People are required to be sterilized in order to be able to change. People are taking away their right to have a family. Yeah, the invasive surgery that's going on there. Or else it's incredibly complicated. You have to go to court and ask for permission and explain. It's an incredibly long process. So this is just kind of 3 countries as an example, just to show you what the requirements are. Again, we can't always change the laws. You certainly may not be able to change the laws on a day-to-day basis, but what are you doing to make life just a little bit easier in your STEM environment? This one just goes back to that attitude survey, again, just to show that there is some nuance between different countries. I'm very glad to say that on LGBT workers in the USA, at least we have 65% of people saying that they're in favor of equal rights for us. Thank you. Do I have to say thank you for that? And it varies. We've got statistics here for India, and we've got statistics here for Turkey. Again, the difference between LGB and trans populations. Those are the laws, but laws don't mean anything for a lot of people. When we look at the reality, we have A 17-year-old girl has been beaten up and locked up by her parents just down the road in Italy. We have teachers being fired. We have women being stabbed to death in Latin America. We have denial of rights of spousal benefits in so-called progressive jurisdictions. And this is just the last 2 weeks. We're dealing with this all the time. Again, you're like, what has this got to do with STEM? Because STEM is not immune. We're just human beings. I know scientists like to think we're somehow in Star Trek and we're in the future and everything's like beautiful and we're so logical, we're beyond all the politics. I think we all know the reality. It's not like that at all. And here's some statistics that were done on experiences. I think these are US statistics, if I remember rightly. The experience of harassment in the STEM environment. So yes, and you can see here that the experience of harassment for men who are LGBT, women who are LGBT, GNC, gender non-conforming persons, and trans people. Specifically, here we're going into more detail, again, on the trans issues, some of the issues that I felt. Do you feel that there's a bathroom that you can access? You know, I was thinking even today, I went outside, I went down to the bathroom, and it was like you have to choose between the guy bathroom and you have to choose between the woman bathroom. And some people, if you walk into them, people say, wait, shouldn't you be in the other one? And it can be hugely uncomfortable, unsafe for people. I'm not saying that we have to change every sign everywhere, but we need to start trying to understand that there needs to be a place where people can actually go to the bathroom. I had stories of physicists who are working in a lab all day and just don't feel comfortable going to the bathroom, holding on for 8 hours. So yes, I'm talking about LGBTIQ2S++, but I'm also talking here about intersectionality, because we all know, why is it that a ton of people don't think we should have equal rights? It's right at the core as to why we have physicists who are standing up and saying, women really aren't kind of equal to men. Or people who are saying, people of a different race, yeah, you're kind of special, you're different, you should be treated differently. So I'm really glad that your theme for this conference is on intersectionality, because it's something which is precious to us. And the LGBTQ movement stands in solidarity with any marginalized group, with equity, with justice for all. And I hope that you will also stand in solidarity with us. Shifting into the STEM sector, this is a completely Google image search sucked onto my PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't mean anything other than to show, in my discussions with scientists, academia, engineering, it's complicated, right? We have structures where we have physicists flying in from India, from China, and sometimes they're consultants and sometimes they're employees, but sometimes they're on short-term contracts. What are you doing when you have something which is so international, so complex, and you're sort of abiding under the rules of the United Kingdom, which generally is a fairly progressive country, but maybe is actually the person is a Ugandan consultant on a contract for 6 months who comes from a different experience. And it's just to understand that I understand, and we all understand we're working in incredibly complex cultures, so we can all talk the talk of like, oh, our policies say this, but how do we make that a reality in some of the ways that we structure our organizations? Another thing for us to understand is we're not at all at the same place on LGBT. And I've kind of just here just mapped out a very rough journey, either of a country or an individual or an organization, of how we go on LGBT stuff, from the oppressed to the open, and that people and institutions, even queer people, when they're living in a deeply oppressive society, are not just criminalized, they're also self-loathing, because everything you've learned from when you were a little kid is like, I'm wrong, I'm a gay guy, I'm not supposed to be gay. And so people are wanting to convert themselves to get away from this. There's such a level of suppression, denial. People want to change. How do you deal with a physics environment where you're dealing with people coming from that situation? Then we move into the fearful, where people like, okay, well, I've learned to accept who I am, but I am not telling anybody else because it is not safe. I'm going to stay in that closet because I know I'm not going to get that promotion. I'm not going to be able to go on that science trip to St. Petersburg. I'm not going to be able to do anything because I will be in physical danger in my workplace if I'm out. Then we shift into the awkwardness phase. Yeah, you know what, I'm queer. I'll tell my close friends. Maybe my boss knows, maybe she doesn't. But I'll hold back. I don't want to be too out there because I'm going to be seen as this like progressive liberal pushing my way. I'm not going to be the one who's accepted to go and speak on conferences. And people don't really want me to be different. They kind of think that a guy is a guy and should be doing this. And then finally we have the open situation where finally people are able to be themselves, to go to the full level of their own what they can bring, be comfortable, and be the best that they actually can be in the work environment. I'm very aware it's a very global north space here. I mean, it's great to have people from all over the world, but all over the world seems to mean mainly North America and Europe. But it is the experiences that you face in those regions is that people do experience discriminations in promotions and opportunities. What can we do to address that? There is a lack of openness in the workplace, and there are lack of protections in working conditions. I think you saw there are very progressive, so-called progressive countries which have no legal protections. Few role models as well. I think the visibility in the STEM sector is still an issue. People don't have someone to look up to. And there's nowhere to go. By that I mean, if I suffer discrimination, experience that in the workplace, who is the identified person to go to? Has that been identified? And I really want to give a shout out to the lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, because women are facing multiple forms of discrimination. You're facing sexism, and if you're a lesbian, bisexual, or queer woman, you're also facing all the discrimination that goes around sexuality as well. And I think that double whammy of misogyny in its multiple forms can be quite horrifying. Less than 60% of LGBTI people in STEM are out. 1 in 3 US physicists has been advised, better for you to stay in the closet. 50% of trans people are saying that they have been harassed in their department. And LGBT students are 10% less likely to enter a STEM career than their heterosexual peers. And this means that work suffers, of course. I don't have to tell you this. It slows down the progress of institutions. It discourages individuals from becoming role models. It tries to maintain the status quo at the expense of all else. And it distracts us from the real work of science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So shifting into the what can be done, and I'm probably running way over time.
No, you're good.
I'm just about okay. Because I actually want to hear from you. I want to hear what you're doing in your places.
We're coming up to 10 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to round this up fairly swiftly now. There are LGBT STEM groups out there. You're going to see them. And some of them are quite nascent. Things are just getting going. But I think talk with them. Because sometimes you don't want to have a huge outing campaign led by management. Maybe you want to talk carefully with some of the LGBTQ people in your institutions first. Because there is such hatred and discrimination against LGBTQ people internationally, it's incredibly important for us that we continue to be included in all discussions on diversity. If you say we're going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and women and race and this, and then we're going to talk about LGBTQ, please don't silo us, because that's what everyone else is trying to do. And do establish protocols around harassment, having seen the level of harassment against trans people in particular. Good practices, visible, allow us to be visible. You'll see some examples shortly. Be inclusive, allow people their gender marker, their pronouns. Great, University of Sussex, I'm glad to see you have your little badges of my pronouns are here. Have an identified point person.
What was that? I could see it, but I was trying, I couldn't even read the pro.
Oh yeah, it says my pronouns are he, him, his.
Ah.
Because you may not actually have the right pronoun everybody assumes. Right. They're like, oh, I assume that your pronouns are.
Okay.
And then somebody says, no, they're not.
I see.
Visible role models, legal protections, maybe data collection, but done carefully. Please don't out people against their will. That's the #1 rule. Visibility, LGBTQ, they are now LGBTQ CERN, had fantastic poster campaign. They put loads of them all over CERN a few years ago, including this one. And if you can't read it, that's because you're not fluent in Klingon.
It's not Klingon.
Go CERN. But they had them in loads of different languages. It was a way a few years ago that everyone went, whoa, 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 what with all the rainbow flags? Because sometimes we're not visible automatically. Sometimes we have to put a bit of rainbow everywhere to be able to remind people, we're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere. And so there's a fantastic website, 500 Queer Scientists, showing that we are out there. Here's Ana Barbara Rodriguez Cavalcante, who I spoke with last week. Very proud to be able to say I'm up on that website too, making sure that she's visible. She's from Brazil and talked about all the complications in institutions back there. LGBT STEM Day has been started. So that was in 2018, it was on the 5th of July, and mark your calendars. 5th of June, 2019. You can find them on that interweb thing. And that's with the institutions that ended up supporting the last LGBT STEM Day. And there's a whole story of how people like CERN were able to get management to say, we're going to buy into this. And that level of visibility has been fantastic to see. My last slide is my thanks to the people who've helped me to do this talk today, scientists who are out there right at the forefront, bringing visibility. They've told me a little about what's happening in their places. I would love to hear from you more what you're doing in yours. Thank you.
Do you have a mic? Yeah, just in front here with a grey jacket. Person with a grey jacket.
Thank you very much. I'll start with doing my coming out. I must confess I'm not from the STEM community. I'm the Equal Opportunities Officer at the Council of the European Union, and I'm very interested in what you do in the STEM sector. I have a question concerning, you used the word silo, and that's a discussion I had with representatives of our own LGBTIQ+ network, which is very visible. We support, as Equal Opportunities Office, we support this network very much. They would like to go a step further. They wanted to do a survey, to reply to a survey to show how inclusive the Council of the European Union can be as an employer. I, as Equal Opportunities Officer, though, thought we do not want to promote anything. We just want to be just an inclusive employer. We take you as you are. You're allowed to be what you are and stand up for your rights and express yourself and do your out if you want. If you don't, that's okay. And I'd like to hear your views about that, about those specific actions to support, let's say, the LGBTIQ+ community.
Do you want to take more questions?
Do you want to do a couple more? Because we only have 5 minutes, I'm afraid. So here in the front. Anyone else with burning question? And one at the back after, following you.
Just as a question, do you see any progress if you look at, I mean, you've been showing us a story which for me, the world I live in, the Accenture world I live in, I missed our name, by the way, and I invite you to come over and to let us help you. But do you see progress? I mean, maybe I'm too focused on positive news in the newspapers because I just hate the negative news. So I recently read in India, there's a court who now allows men to marry men, and okay. Well, I maybe have made it too positive then already in my own mind, but I had it for today as a positive note. So my question again, do you see also progress, positive notes in this area?
Great.
Do you want to take the last question, answer all three, or answer now, then we'll go for the third?
Take the third and then...
Okay, it's just the red jacket, just at the back.
Hi, André. Thank you for sharing this very enlightening presentation. I'm Ella Vindura from Washington, D.C., Gallaudet University. You talked about the hatred faced by LGBTQ communities and individuals. Do you have any words of wisdom about how to combat yet another barrier, which is ignorance? People who don't know how to ask questions, don't know what to say, therefore are completely unable to support the LGBTQA community because of their own sense of inadequacy. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for the questions. Let's start with the good news. Yeah, there's been a lot of good news, and there was just a few weeks ago the decision by the Indian Supreme Court to decriminalize same-sex between men in India. So I would love to be standing here with you today to saying that they got same-sex marriage, but we're right at baby steps in many ways in the court system in India. There are phenomenal changes happening. We've seen Malta in this country, in this continent, really taking a huge step forwards and allowing legal gender recognition changes in your identity markers in your passports easily, basically on request. We've seen Canada bringing in, again, gender identity laws, and we're seeing decriminalization, yes, in India. We've also seen it in Mozambique. There is some progress. We're also seeing huge backlash, and particularly we're seeing that coming based on so-called religious, traditional, cultural arguments, which will then take me actually to the last question there, ignorance. Yeah, what's that famous line? It's ignorance breeds fear, I think, and fear breeds hate, something along those lines. But it is, and we see it in our data all the time, that there's just like a level of not knowing, not understanding. And so I think that targeted, wise, coming out role models, I think is incredibly important. We're doing work to make sure that the role models are not always white, cisgendered, global north men, sometimes women, leading the pack, because we're diverse everywhere. Trying to get leaders from my own country of South Africa to be able to speak more openly about it is an uphill challenge. And that brings me, I think, to the question around how visible should we be, or should we be having a big coming out campaign in, for example, the Council of Europe, or should it be something like, no, we just accept everybody as we are? I think the fact is that if you have a queer, gender non-conforming woman who just looks different when she walks into a place, like just by the very level of living, she has to be visible about it. And I think having management wisely being able to say, whoever you are, including this, is acceptable, is cool. And to make sure that there are role models, to make sure that the very senior level, where are the deans of the universities who are sitting down with the queer groups? It doesn't have to be just the queer people who speak up on LGBT STEM Day. Yeah, it's our straight, wonderful allies, such as you in this room, and your management, the people up there.
Great. Thanks so much, André. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for